विश्वं दर्पणदृश्यमाननगरी तुल्यन्निजान्तर्गतं पश्यन्नात्मनि मायया बहिर्भूतभूतं यथा निद्रया यस्साक्षात् कुरुते प्रबोधसमये स्वात्मानमेवाद्वयं तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नमः इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये बीजस्यान्तरिवाङ्कुरो जगदिदं प्राङ्निर्विकल्पं पुनः मायाकल्पितदेशकालकलना वैचित्र्यचित्रीकृतं मायावीव विजृम्भयत्यपि महायोगी वयस्वेच्छया तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नमः इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नमः इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये। ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। ॐ So from 27th verse up to the 68th verse, Vidyaranya entered into Abhasavada Prakriya, Abhasavada Vichara. It's a model, and in that, he establishes the Abhasavada by negating another Prakriya called Avachedavada. So these two methodologies, Prakriya means methodologies, they are used for the sake of defining Jiva and Ishvara. In Abhasavada, the Vyashti Pratibimba is Chaitanyam will be called Jiva, whereas Samashti Pratibimba Chaitanya will be called Ishvara. In Avachedavada, Vyashti Avachinna Chaitanya is called Jiva and Samashti Avachinna Chaitanya is called Ishvara. So these two Vadas are used only to define Jiva and Ishvara. And ultimately, both of them are not, we are not interested in both of them. We are not as interested in establishing Jiva and Ishvara, but our aim is that by negating both Jiva and Ishvara as a Vyavarika Satyam, showing the Paramarthika Satyam, which is Brahman in both. Because the Upadhis are Mithya, and therefore this Pratibimba Chaitanya or Avachinna Chaitanya, they are Mithya. So whether we are going to either we take Abhasavada or Avachedavada, it doesn't matter for us, since both define only Vyavarika Jiva and Vyavarika Ishvara. So the difference is only in the Mithya field of Jiva and Ishvara. The Satyam is never neither a Abhasa nor a Avacheda, neither Jiva nor Ishvara. Brahman alone is a reality of Jiva, Brahman alone is a reality of the Ishvara. And therefore that's an identity between them. So, so therefore there is, Jiva is considered, let us say, Karya, and Ishvara is a Karana, etc. Well, that is also not true. All these things are very irrelevant for us. Neither Yashti, neither Samashti is a reality. Only the absolute Brahman alone is a reality. So, and once we arrive at this Brahman, in either of that, in either Jiva or in Ishvara, well, other things become irrelevant to us. Either a Avachinna Chaitanya or a Pratibimba Chaitanya, etc., they are irrelevant to us. So, we should bother not too much about these internal differences, but Acharyas definitely, after, as I said, after Shankaracharya ji, whatever the Acharyas have come in the tradition, well, they preferred one Prakriya over the other, and they try to show even certain defects in the Prakriya which they are not accepting also. So this kind of a discussion, of course, is here, where Vidyaranya is basically favoring a Abhasavada Prakriya over Avachedavada. And here Abhasavada and Pratibimbavada has been taken as a one thing only. Like even in Upadesha Sahasra in 18th chapter, if you see, Shankaracharya ji talks about abhasa and pratibimba, freely. Means so he accepts abhasavada and pratibimba vada. Of course, there is a difference. In advanced text, you will find a difference between abhasavada and pratibimba vada, and I have shown you the difference also. But certain time, acharyas they combine together, or they accept either abhasavada and pratibimba as one prakriya alone, and avachedavada is another one. And then definitely there will be an argument which vada is better. Vidyaranya supports abhasavada. Sureshwaracharya supports abhasavada, etc. I have told those things also. Anyway, and then in verse 34, well, it said, Nahi dhi bhava bhavitvad abhasosti dhiyah prathak iti ched alpamevoktam dihi api evam swadehatah. So Vidyaranya now, raises a possible Purupaksha from the Avachedavadi, or it can be from any person in general who has an objection against Abhasavada Prakriya. A Purupakshi has been raised here, a Purupaksha has been raised here. And then Vidyaranya answers. The first line is a Purupaksha in that verse 34, and second line is an answer to that. So, what is a Purupaksha? Well, Purupakshi says Chidabhasa is never experienced being separate from the mind. Chidabhasa is never experienced independent of the mind by anyone. It is always experienced when the mind is manifest. So when the mind is there, Chidabhasa is there. When the mind resolves, Chidabhasa resolves. Then why do you introduce Chidabhasa as an independent entity? O Vidyaranya. Because in Abhasavada we say Chidabhasa is there. And naturally, Abhasavada has Chidabhasa. So you are talking about Chidabhasa. But the Chidabhasa is never experienced independent of the mind. Mind resolves, there is no Chidabhasa. When mind is there, the Chidabhasa is there. So, well, in that case, why are you introducing Chidabhasa as an independent entity? So, so dhibhava bhavitvad abhasah dhibhave bhavati. Means Chidabhasa exists only when the mind exists. Chidabhasa does not exist when the mind doesn't exist. That means mind resolves. So, it doesn't have an existence separate from the mind. Bhava means existence. Dhi means the mind. So, dhibhave bhavati. When the mind exists, abhasaha bhavati. Therefore, so from the mind, there is no separate Chidabhasa. This is a Purupaksha in the first line. Then, in second line, the answer is given. Iti chet. Vidyaranya says, if you have such a doubt, well, you are trying to negate basically the separate existence of a Chidabhasa. Just because your argument is not experienced independently. So then Vidyaranya says, well, in that case, nobody has experienced the mind separate from the body. So whether it is my mind, your mind is experienced only when the body is there. So after body is removed or burnt, etc., the mind exists, Sukshma Sharira exists. How do you know? So nobody experienced the existence of the mind independent of the body. Nobody experienced the travel of the mind. Well, in which case, how can you talk about a separate existence of the mind? You also say body and mind. Like we say the reflecting medium mind and Chidabhasa. So you have an objection. So then you say body and mind. But well, you have never experienced mind independent of the body. Then why do you accept separate existence of the mind? Different from the body. So, well, therefore, he says, iti chet, if you are arguing based on experience, your argument is very, very weak, because the mind is also never experienced separate from the body, exactly like Chidabhasa also not being experienced separate from the mind. And therefore, if you negate Chidabhasa, O Purupakshi, well, I will negate the mind also as a separate existence of the mind. Are you ready for that? So then he said, give me the mic. And then he answers in verse number 35. Dehe mritepi buddhischet shastradasti tatha sati buddheranyashchidabhasah praveshashrutishu shrutah. He says, I accept the survival of the mind and its independent existence even after the body is destroyed, after the brain is destroyed. I accept the existence of the mind, and I accept the vasanas of the mind, and then the travel of the mind depending upon punya papa and vasanas and all of them. I accept everything, travel of the mind, even when body is not there. Means I accept independent existence of the mind. So even though I have not experienced the mind separate from the body, I accept. Vidyaranya says, how? How are you accepting? He says, I accept because for me Shastra is a pramana. Many things which are not experienced by our sense organs, well, but I still accept because they have been revealed by the Shastra. And for me, Shastra is a valid source of knowledge. So once the source is valid, well, there cannot be any doubt about it. So like in the field of science also, well, you have not directly measured everything. You have not done experiments. But still you accept whatever has been told by the scientists or their experiments and their conclusions, you accept. And that is how it is, we call it as a knowledge. Once I accept that scientist or the science as such as a source of knowledge, well, then we accept. We don't call it as a belief. We call it as a knowledge or a fact. So whether something is belief or fact, well, will depend upon the status I give to the source. Once the source I look upon as a valid, I never call it as a belief. That's what we call as a Shraddha. Shraddha in a pramana, if we say like that, acknowledging the validity of the means of knowledge. We acknowledge that it is valid. That's called Shraddha. And therefore, whatever the source gives me that data, I will not call it as a belief. I will call it as a knowledge. So in fact, most of our information, including what is happening right now, even in Ukraine, etc., well, we don't call it as a belief, right? We call it as a knowledge. We accept it as a fact. So, because you give a validity to a particular reporter, news reporter, or particular news channel, then whatever they say, we accept. So, well, definitely. So, otherwise, it just remains belief. But basically, we take it as a information. We accept it as a fact. We call it as a knowledge. So what is happening right now in Ukraine, whatever the news channel, basically cater to you, we accept. So same way he says, well, I am a Vaidika, and for me Veda is even more valid than all the scientific statements put together in the world. And therefore, what he what the Veda talks to me, well, I will not call it as a belief, but I will take it as a fact and knowledge. And so Purvapakshi is saying here that for me there is a mind separate from the body, and the mind travels depending upon punya papa and even vasanas, etc. Well, I will take it as a fact, and I say this is a knowledge. I will not call it as a belief, because this has been told by the Shastra, and I have full faith in the Shastra. I acknowledge the validity of the Shastra, and therefore, well, on that basis I am telling you, mind has a separate existence apart from the body, well, because Shastra talks about it. So, well, Vidyaranya says that if that is the case, well, Chidabhasa, well, is also not a part of the mind, and it is something independent of the mind, outside the mind, well, and it has been formed because of the consciousness, because of the Atma. I mean, the consciousness, Atma alone lends the consciousness to the body, then in the form of a Chidabhasa, etc. Well, this also I have gathered from the Shastra. So, I have come to know that the mind does not have an intrinsic consciousness, so it has borrowed a consciousness, etc. And for that, the pramana is a Shastra only. So, for you, O Purvapakshi, Shastra is a pramana for the mind's separate existence. Well, for me also Shastra is a pramana for Chidabhasa's separate existence, separate from the mind. But please understand that because I have said before that Chidabhasa you can never find independent of the mind. And now here I am saying Chidabhasa is an independent of the mind. But please understand that Chidabhasa is something which is not an intrinsic nature of the mind. That is what we are establishing. Please understand that. Whether Chidabhasa is available experientially independent of the mind, we are not saying. But there is something called Chidabhasa other than the mind. That's what we are establishing. Please understand this. Because otherwise you will find that earlier Swami was telling something else and now he is saying something else. Experientially you won't find Chidabhasa independent of the mind. But there is something called Chidabhasa independent of the mind as such that we have to accept. We never experience it. Please understand that. And therefore, because minds, it means if Chidabhasa is not an independent, it means mind becomes conscious then. Mind becomes conscious. Means if mind is a conscious entity, then, well, there is no question of talking about Atma itself. Mind is Jadam. And still mind you find conscious. And therefore there is a separate entity called Chidabhasa. That's what we have to understand. So, this is what we are establishing. We are not trying to prove that experientially mind is independent of the Chidabhasa is independent of the mind. We are not trying to prove that. Experientially it will not be available. As the mind manifests, Chidabhasa will be there. As the mind resolves, Chidabhasa resolves. That is experience. That is true. But there is something called Chidabhasa which is independent of the mind. Is therefore reflecting medium plus reflected consciousness we say. When we say plus, therefore it is an entity, and that is what we are establishing, that there is something called Chidabhasa, well, which is independent of the mind, even though experientially you won't find it. But because Shastra talks about it. Anyway, so for that also Pramana is a Shastra only. So, well, Siddhanti says, if Shastra is Shastra is a Pramana for you, O Purupakshi, for the mind separate existence, independent of the body, well, and the body dies and even burnt into ashes, but there is a Sukshma Sharira, and in that Sukshma Sharira there is a mind, of course, and there is a Punya Papa, Vasanas, etc., and then there is a travel also, trajectory of the Sukshma Sharira depending upon that. So, well, that is, well, we call, that is a knowledge, it is not a belief. So, the same Veda, well, I also accept as a valid source of knowledge, and well, for on that basis I am telling you that there is a Chidabhasa, which is an independent entity from the mind. So, and to call this as a fact, definitely the Pramana is a Shastra, because Shastra talks about it, and it is a valid source of knowledge. That's how all our in our all the scientific equations in our institutions, educational institutions, etc. We derived those equations, etc. in physics, in chemistry. We used to derive a lot of equations, right? And all those equations, etc., are really derived by. They have really derived by the scientists, but we accept them as a valid source of knowledge. They have experimented and given those equations, etc., laws, etc., and we trust them. So that's how we call this as a physics. We consider as not as a belief, but we consider it as a knowledge. Similarly, Shastra Pramana also is there. So if you have a Shastra Pramana, well, on that basis we can talk about it, and then we supply logic. Yeah, not that just because Shastra says this and therefore we have to accept. We don't say that. So, because since the Shastra says, and Shastra is a valid source of knowledge, so we better to accept it. No, then it still remains a belief. But while we give a further logic also, we support that the teachings of the Shastra, that we support the facts given by the Shastra by logic. That mind cannot have an intrinsic consciousness. Well, why mind cannot have intrinsic consciousness? Because mind is basically is a jadam, is an inert entity. Why? Because it is savikaritvat, and because it is constantly changing. Whatever is constantly changing or whatever is changing is a matter, and whatever is matter is inert, and therefore, so antakaranam jadam, savikaratvat, gatavat. We can. This is a logic, anumana vakya. Antakaranam jadam. We are proving. Antakarana is a paksha. As what is sadhya? Jadam. And so once we establish it is jadam, means it is not conscious. If it is not conscious, then definitely if it is conscious, then there must be Chidabhasa. And therefore, antakaranam jadam, we supply that. We prove that by logic, by anumana vakya. So antakaranam is a paksha. And a jadam is a sadhya. Antakaranam jadam. What is the reason? Hetu. Right? Anumana vakyam should have a hetu. Savikaratvat. Because it is vikari, it is constantly changing. You should give example that whatever is vikari is jada. For that you should give an example. Right? For this invariable concomitance, well, you should give a example. Yeah, gatavat. Pot is constantly changing. Right? You buy a pot now, well, and it is constantly changing. Therefore, you throw it also. And you buy a new pot. Therefore, it is constantly changing. So, whatever is changing must be jadam. Anyway, antakaranam jadam, then we can give another anumana vakya, logic. Antakaranam jadam bhautikatvat gatavat. Again, antakarana is jada because it is made up of it is made up of elements, and therefore it is jada. How do you say that? Well, whatever is bhautikam is jadam. That's an invariable concomitance. Whatever is bhautikam, whatever is elemental is jadam. Well, gatavat, like a pot. Pot is made up of elements, earth, etc. And therefore it is jadam. Same way, antakaranam also is made up of elements, subtle elements. Therefore it is jadam. Well, and therefore consciousness in the mind, well, basically belong to, not belong to the mind, but it must have been borrowed. Then borrowed from what? Borrowed from the source, which is the source of consciousness, that is Atma. And that is why we call there is a Chidabhasa, which is independent of the mind, which is of course present all the time along with the mind. That is okay, experientially that is true. But there is called Chidabhasa, independent of the mind, separate from the mind. Well, that is there. So, there is a Chidabhasa which is revealed in the Shruti Pramana. This is logic, what we said. First, we have to accept Shruti. Shruti says there is a Chidabhasa. Atma lends consciousness to the mind, that is called Chidabhasa. Anyway, and we support that Shruti statement by logic. And we cannot say your Shruti Pramana and my Shruti Pramana, etc. because there is one Shruti, one Veda, which is the source of knowledge. So entire Veda is a Pramana. Okay. Then the next question will be, it is said in the Veda that there is a Chidabhasa, etc. or there is a even mind separate from the body, etc. For all this, there is a Veda alone is a Pramana. Oh, Purapakshi, your statement or my statement has ultimately source in the Veda, that is true. But then, what is that Shruti Pramana? You should say. We can't say that it is said in the Shruti, you find it out. No. Vidyarnya, ask where your Shruti is. So, well, for Purapakshi, the Shruti Pramana is a Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. In the Sharirika Brahmana, 4.4, well, there is, it has been said very clearly that from that Shruti Vakya we can definitely say that mind is an independent entity, independent of the body. Well, so what is that statement? Savijnano bhavati, savijnanameva anvavakramati, tam vidyakarmani samanvarabhete purvaprajnacha. So the mind leaves the body, right? Tam vidyakarmani samanvarabhete purvaprajnacha. Purvaprajna vasanas, etc. And vidyakarmani, depending upon his upasanas and karmas, etc. in this life, well, at the end of the prarabdha, he leaves the body and departs. Therefore, mind is an independent entity of the brain. Mind is an independent entity of the physical body. That is very clearly said there. Shruti Vakya is there. So for now, and even this is a Shruti. And in Smriti also, 15th chapter, very clearly, right? Manashashthani indriyani, prakritisthani karshati. So, well, manashashthani indriyani, 5 sense organs, and manaha, that is a 6th. Well, all of them are pulled from this physical body at the time of, at the time of the end of the prarabdha, when the body dies, all these 6 are they pulled up from, they are leaving this body. So clearly mind is separate entity from the physical body, it has been proven. So Shruti and Smriti Vakya are there for the support of this Purapakshi, who is telling, the Shastra says that mind is an independent entity of the physical body, even though experientially you cannot prove. Experientially, you cannot prove the existence of the mind independent of the body. Definitely not. But still, it's an independent entity. That is, we say, that is, Purupakshi is telling on the basis of Shruti Smriti Vakya. So he has a support valve of the Shruti and Smriti, that mind can survive even after the leaving the body. So Vidyaranya says, if you have a Shastra Pramana, well, for that, well, I also have got my own Shastra Vakya, well, and that is Pravesha Shruti. So he says, Pravesha Shruti Shu. Pravesha Shruti means Anupravesha Shruti. Anupravesha Shruti means these Vedic statements, well, which talk about the entry of the Atma into the body. So if Atma has to enter this body-mind complex, it can be only in one way. Original Atma means our Atma, which is Satchidananda or Brahman, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahman, can never enter body-mind complex. Why? Because that Atma cannot enter, because definitely it is all pervading. So, well, it's all pervading, then there is no question of an entry. Entry is possible only for a limited entity. Limited entity which is not there in something else can enter into that and pervade. But this which is all pervading, then pervading already the body-mind complex has not to enter. So, definitely, so when the Upanishad talks about the entry, it can only in the form of a Chidabhasa. The Atma's reflection forming in the mind, well, alone can be called as an entry, pravesha. So, and we say, like, just as I enter the mirror, I can say, when I stand in front of the mirror, I say, now I have entered into the mirror in the form of a reflection. Definitely. Like even the sun also enters the mirror in the form of a reflection. And there are so many entry vakyas, pravesha vakyas. In Taittiriya Upanishad it is there, in Brahmanand Valli very clearly, in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 147, there is a, well, 147 is basically a pravesha shruti, and it is very big, and Shankaracharya ji has written a very big commentary on that. And of course in Taittiriya Upanishad also it is there. And now Vidyaranya refers to Aitareya pravesha shruti in the next verse. Dhiyuktasya pravesha-chet naitareye dhiyah prathak atma pravesham sankalpya pravishta iti giyate. So Purupakshi raises basically another objection. It's all very head-splitting, very nice question. I mean, in the pravesha shruti, well, Atma enters the mind is not really stated. But Atma entering the body is mentioned. So when we talk that Atma enters this physical body, well, it means the mind entering the physical body. Right? Sukshma Sharira enters in the physical body. That's how it is. Sukshma Sharira departs. That is called death. Sukshma Sharira enters the body, which is called Janma. So we say Jiva enters the body. Jiva departs the body. That's how we say. And therefore, Atma enters the mind is really clearly not stated in Pravesha Shruti. Atma enters the body, we find. So, if Atma enters the body, means definitely then mind enters the physical body along with the Atma, we have to say. Atma alone enters the mind has not been said clearly. So, definitely, and Atma means Satchidananda Atma, that cannot enter the mind. Therefore, we said Atma enters in the body in form of a Chidabhasa, and thereby we say Chidabhasa is independent entity. But basically, generally, you don't find this kind of a Vakya that Atma enters into the body. If that is there, it is wonderful. Generally, we find the Pravesha Vakya, Pravesha Shruti, as Atma enters the physical body. Well, then Atma enters the physical body, then definitely Atma enters along with the mind, Sukshma Sharira. Atma enters along with the mind into the physical body. That is there. So if the Shruti talks about Atma entering the mind, well, then you can say Atma enters the mind in the form of Chidabhasa. So this is the objection. You said, well, in our case it is so clear, right? He says, you see our Brihadaranyaka Vakya, etc. very clear. You see our Smriti Vakya, 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, very clear. Manashasthani indriyani prakritisthani karshati. Where they are pulled from the physical body. Mind along with the sense organs are pulled from the physical body. Very clearly that mind has an independent existence of the physical body. Very clear. In your case, it is not there. That, well, Atma enters into the mind. If Atma enters into mind, you will say, well, Atma is all pervading, therefore it cannot enter the mind. Therefore, well, in that forming the reflection, well, Atma has entered. You can say. And therefore, Chidabhasa is independent existence of the mind, you can prove. But it is not there. You find any Pravesha Shruti, well, you will find Atma enters into the world, Atma enters into the physical body, like that it is there. Therefore, definitely Atma enters into the physical body, means that definitely Atma enters into the physical body along with the mind, it must be there. Therefore, how can you prove the Chidabhasa's independent existence of the mind? And therefore, if such a thing is there, Atma enters into the mind, well, you can take it as a Chidabhasa. We understand it. That is okay. In form of a Chidabhasa, well, Atma enters into the mind, we can say. And therefore, Chidabhasa is independent, you can say. But it is not there. And therefore, Atma enters into the mind, since it is not there, you cannot say this kind of a thing. Well, that is there. And therefore, so when Atma enters the body, definitely it enters along with the mind. Consciousness is basically entering the body through the Sukshma Sharira, through the mind. And therefore, well, Atma as a Chidabhasa is entering the mind, it is not there. Therefore, he says, Dhi Yuktasya. Dhi Yuktasya, well, definitely means Atma along with the mind has a pravesha, has an entry into the body. Atma along with the mind has the entry into the body, not alone. Not alone it is said that Atma is entering the mind in form of a Chidabhasa. Well, up to this is the Purupaksha. Then Vidyaranya answers, well, this is your argument of Purupakshi. Well, Vidyaranya says no. Because in Taittiriya Upanishad and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, well, the entry statement is definitely a vague statement. We accept it. Atma's entry is talked about. Whether Atma is entering in the mind has not been said. But Atma enters into the body, Atma enters into the creation, and that is not very clearly. That is how it has been said in the Taittiriya Upanishad and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. But in Taittiriya Upanishad, it is very clearly stated that Atma enters the Sukshma Sharira. Definitely, then Atma enters into the mind. So, if the Atma is to enter the mind, well, as said in the Taittiriya Upanishad, then, well, definitely you have to accept that there is a Chidabhasa entry. And if Chidabhasa is entering the mind, definitely the idea conveyed is that Chidabhasa is or the consciousness basically, is not an intrinsic part of the mind. So what is intrinsic? Well, you cannot talk about it as entry, naturally. If what is intrinsic, we cannot talk about its entry. Like we cannot say, well, the heat enters into the fire. You can never say, because heat is intrinsic to the fire. So definitely, but in Aitareya, fortunately for us, that it has been clearly stated that Atma enters into the this subtle body or mind. It has been clearly said there. So the language of entry, well, definitely cannot be used if consciousness is intrinsic to the mind. So, in Taittiriya Upanishad, in 1.3.11 and 1.3.12, well, Vidyaranya, well, definitely, he is quoting this Taittiriya Upanishad, and he says that it clearly stated Atma enters into the mind. So, when Vidyaranya summarizes these two mantras in next two shlokas, in the 36 and 37. So here he says here, Pravesham Sankalpya. So Pravesham, in 37 and 38, I'm sorry. So he clearly paraphrases these two mantras. Important words are mentioned there of Taittiriya. So here in this verse 36, pravesham sankalpya. Sankalpya means well visualizing. Atma visualizes this pravesha. Pravesham. Atma pravesham sankalpya. Atma visualizes the pravesha. The creator Atma, the Paramatma, basically, before pravesha, he does a sankalpa for a creation. That let me create, right? And then after creation, he says, let me enter. That's how it is. So kamayata bahusyam prajayeti, etc. That is a sankalpa. So you can say akamayata, or that is a sankalpa there. So let me create, etc. And then so Atma visualizes that let me create all of them, all these bodies, etc., other thing, all names and forms, through with the Maya. We have to accept it. So you know, I am not saying, but you know very well. So let me create all of them. And then after visualizing and implementing this creation, then Atma visualizes again the entry in that creation, in the bodies, in the form of a Chidabhasa. And so that is called Pravesha Shruti. So while talking about this Atma Sankalpa, well, Diyaha Pruthak, well, Atma is not along with the Buddhi. Where it has been said? In Aitareya, not in Brihadaranyaka and in Taittiriya. Then definitely not. Atma enters the creation, that is said. Therefore it is not clear. But here in Aitareya, Diyaha Pruthak. So first Atma visualize. So Pravesham Sankalpa will be later. But first he visualizes the whole creation. Subtle creation, Sukshma Prapancha and Sthula Prapancha. Very clearly it has been said there. And that Atma visualizes both the types of creation. And then Atma enters in the body, which means enters the subtle body and the gross body. And that therefore there it is very clear that Atma enters into the subtle body, in the mind. Well, therefore it is in the form of a Chidabhasa, and therefore Chidabhasa is a independent entity of the mind, Sukshma Sharira, etc. We can very well say that. So Diyaha Pruthak. So Atma is not along with the Buddhi. Buddhi is also a part of creation. It has been said very clearly in the Aitareya Upanishad. Atma is separate from that. Atma, independent of the mind, visualizes the first process of the creation. Or creates subtle bodies and gross bodies, and then visualizes the process of entry in the subtle creation, in the mind, senses, etc. Well, and there it has been, definitely it is in the form of a Chidabhasa. So therefore we have to accept the statement that Chidabhasa is basically a independent entity of the mind, based on our Aitareya Shruti, that is very clear regarding that. So and now he is basically quoting these two mantras, 1.3.11 and 1.3.12. He taking some important words from those two mantras. He quotes that Aitareya Shruti basically in 37 and 38. Let's see in the verse 37. Katham vidam sakshadeham madrute syaditirnat vidarya murdnasimanam pravishtas samsaratyayam. Now Vidyaranya is paraphrasing those two Aitareya Upanishad mantras, 1.3.11 and 1.3.12. In the previous shloka in verse 36, he said, Aitareya Upanishad says that he mentions Aitareya, that Aitareya Upanishad talks about the entry of the Atma into the mind. He said like that, but he did not say what Upanishad, which mantra says in which words. That he did not say in verse 36. That he gives here. So the exact mantra, of course, is not quoted in this. He borrows some of the prominent words here from the mantra, and he makes his own shloka. So this is just he gives an essence of it. He paraphrases those two mantras. So Upanishad says, this is the visualization of the Atma. That Atma is introduced in the Aitareya Upanishad in the very first mantra itself. That Atma va idameka eva agre asit nanyat kinchana mishyata. Atma alone was there before the creation. Like our Chandogya, Sadeva Somedamagra Asit, Ekameva Dvitiyam. Here in Aitareya Upanishad, well, the 111 says, Atma eva idamakra idameke eva agra asit. Well, na anyat kinchana mishat. Where Atma alone was there before the creation and nothing else was there. Therefore, Atma visualized, and Srushti is very elaborately talked about there. So, and in the first section, in the first chapter, first section, and in the first chapter, second section, well, both talks about this Panchabhuta Srushti, and of course, Devata Srushti is there, Anna Srushti is there, Sharira Srushti is there. All that is there in first chapter, first section, and first chapter, second section. The gross creation, subtle creation, including the senses and mind and everything, has been said there. And well, and in each, while talking about this creation, well, the verb is given there to indicate that before creation, Atma visualizes the whole gamut of this creation. So when we definitely, and then well, it is said when everything is created, including these bodies and minds, etc., sense organs, all of them were created, and without Atma, they are all what? They are Jadavastu, without life. They are not sentient. They will be insentient only. Then even though, well, there is no time gap as such, but the Upanishad is visualizing a time gap in which the entire creation, which has all this, thousands and thousands of physical bodies and thousands of this subtle bodies, etc., which are encased within the physical bodies, and they are insentient, they are like dead bodies only. And well, definitely, and then Atma visualizes that without my blessing, well, I have created all of them, but without my blessing, well, body can never become active. Body is not sentient, then it cannot function. It doesn't have a life. To have a sentiency, to have a life, I will have to enter. And therefore, well, so it enters the mind in the form of a Chidabhasa. Atma is not, and we have to understand here, well, we just here talks about that Atma lends a Chidabhasa consciousness. Basically, Atma lends consciousness to the mind in form of a Chidabhasa. Atma enters the mind in form of a Chidabhasa. Well, that is true, but then we should understand that Atma definitely lends even existence also. We are not talking about existence here, but we have to understand that very well. So the very existence of the body-mind complex is also, well, is due to grace of Atma only. Atma alone lends existence also. So, and then Atma visualizes, well, how can this, how can this bodies, gross or subtle, well, they can function basically without me being entering there. Once mind, the Atma enters in form of Chidabhasa, everything becomes conscious, sentient, and when they are sentient, there will be activity, there will be a life, etc. So basically, this is all basically imagination. We should understand that it's not that Atma is sitting somewhere and he has visualized, created all this, and they are lying there outside somewhere, and now he is really having a pity on them. what they will do without me, they remain dead, etc., and therefore let me enter. This is all just a process of explanation, etc. We should not think that it is really happening that way. Anyway, so basically this kind of detail are not there in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad and Taittiriya Upanishad. There says Atma visualizes everything. So kamayata bahusyam prajaya. Let me become many. Let me basically create all names and forms. Let me become many. And then tat sruštva tadeva anupravishata, etc. Tat sruštva, and having created, well, he entered into the creation. So therefore we can't understand that, well, that Atma entered into the mind basically in form of a Chidabhasa. We don't get such a clear statement from even Taittiriya also, not even in a Brihadaranyaka Upanishad also, in 147, even though very beautiful bhashyam is there of this Pravesha Shruti, very long bhashyam, still the clarity is not there. but that clarity is here. That very nicely, first chapter, first section and second section talks about creation of Panchamahabhutas, creation of subtle and gross, and then creation of senses, creation of mind, creation of the gross bodies, creation of devatas, creation of that food for all of them, varieties of the varieties of the bodies for them. Definitely foods are also should be created, because once the Atma enters into them and they become active, everything becomes active, including prana, then they will become hungry and they need food. So Bhagavan created even food for them, everything. And then he entered. Definitely, then it is very clear that having created minds, etc., mind, subtle, the subtle bodies, etc., and the gross bodies, etc., and food and devatas, then Atma entered. Therefore, Atma definitely is independent of this mind, etc., and enters. Then definitely it is in the form of Chidabhasa also. Therefore, Chidabhasa is independent of the mind. We can definitely prove that. Therefore, Vidyaranya quotes Aitare Shruti for that purpose only. Anyway, so Atma visualizes that, Pravesha also. But then, before Pravesha, he also thought that, through which gate I should enter into this body. So Atma did not want to enter through any one of the popular holes called sense organs. Therefore, Atma created a special hole, basically, called Brahmarandra. Randra means a hole. So, that's in the head. It's called Brahmarandra because not only the jiva goes in through that, enters through that, but during Krama Mukti also, the jiva comes out of that also. So, Krama Mukti means, you can understand, the one who has done a lot of upasana, etc., throughout the life of the Ishvara, definitely goes to Brahmaloka. We know that very well. And then he gains knowledge from Brahmaji, etc., and then becomes free. And so in Brahmaloka, he lives as a free person, as a Jivan Mukta. He lives like the person who gains knowledge here, till his prarabdha is over, he lives. Same way, this person who has done a upasana, etc., while on Ishvara but cannot gain knowledge of Ishvara as identity with the Ishvara, he gains that knowledge while in Brahmaloka. So that how the jiva leaves this physical body once the prarabdha is over? Through Brahmarandra. So there is an aperture in the head. It pierces that aperture and goes through that. So jiva goes out. Also, special jivas who have done this upasana, etc. So this upasakas goes also out through that Brahmarandra, and through jiva enters also in this physical body through that Brahmarandra also. So Randra means a gateway here. So basically Paramatma thought, now I have to enter that, otherwise this physical body will remain dead, the senses will remain dead, everything will remain dead, mind also will not function and nothing. Therefore, I have to enter. But then through which gate I should enter? That's also there in the Aitare operation. He all thinks over all these things. And then he thought, and he said, let me enter through this Brahmarandra. So Randra means a gate, and Brahmarandra means a gateway through which Brahman enters, Paramatma enters. So it is that which Vidyaranya paraphrases here. So we say that the skull basically is not one whole piece, but several pieces together, and therefore there will be some intermediary gap. Gap is there, and that is why when we they give an example of we call an electrician, like in a bathroom we want a certain a handle to be fixed, and then you will call a person, and or you want to take a certain electric line, etc. Definitely you will call electrician, and and in your bathroom or in a room, suppose there are all tiles. Where will he make the hole? Definitely not in the tile itself, but where the two tiles join, and then there is definitely a gap there. So there he makes a hole. So here also the skull is not a one piece, we call. There are many pieces. So in between two pieces there is a hole. So Paramatma basically entered through that in form of a jiva, definitely. And well, that gap between these two is called sima naturally. When one is over and the other starts, so that's a sima, border. So it's a gap. So basically, here Bhagwan must have Bhagwan also has entered through that. Anyway, so he made the entry into the body. He entered the body in the form of a Chidabhasa. Now you can understand it is in the form of Chidabhasa. Atma, which is all pervading, cannot enter. Still entry is there, therefore definitely it is in form of a reflection only. And that Chidabhasa, we call it as a Jiva. But the tragedy, of course, is that after entering the body, Chidabhasa has become alive. Till then, the Chidabhasa was not alive. And and it is that reflected consciousness, of course, because alive means it becomes effulgent, and because of its effulgence the body and the mind also becomes effulgent, sentient, and then Chidabhasa has a choice. Either it should claim the original consciousness, because that is the consciousness alone has entered in form of Chidabhasa. So that Chidabhasa should claim that I am basically Brahman. And I have entered as a Chidabhasa. Chidabhasa is not my original, it's my Sarupa. I am basically Brahman. It should say. Or, well, it can claim I am Brahman. Or it can claim the mind where it has entered in form of a reflection. So that choice it has to claim either a reflecting medium as oneself, or to claim, really it should claim that I am a Brahman. Naturally, the better option is, well, it should claim that I am Brahman. Well, but unfortunately, due to definitely this avidya, it claims the reflecting medium as oneself. Means it claims as a Chidabhasa, it claims as a Ahankara. We know very well all these things. The very Ahamvritti arises in the mind. The very first function of the mind is to generate Ahamvritti, to claim the whole mind as oneself. And therefore, well, this Chidabhasa claims Ahankara as oneself. Not Chidabhasa claims Brahman as oneself. And that is how the whole problem starts. Once you claim the whole mind as Aham, then definitely other parts of the subtle body also it claims as oneself. And the subtle body pervades the gross body. So it claims gross body as oneself. And that is how this individual is born, due to avidya. Due to avidya, this individuality is born. And then the definitely duality, of course. Then when you say this is aham, then everything is idam. And that is how duality is born. So Dvaitam is born definitely due to Ahankara. And Ahankara is born due to avidya. So this is how the thing is. So anyway, so this is, and then samsara starts. Once Dvaitam comes, or this individuality comes, then definitely that Chidabhasa definitely has a sense of limitations, etc. To get rid of the sense of limitations, because that's not his nature. The limitlessness, Brahman alone is a nature. All pervading Brahman is a nature of the Chidabhasa. Because that Brahman alone has entered Brahman alone has entered into the mind as a Chidabhasa. Therefore, Chidabhasa is nothing but Brahman. But, while due to avidya, the Chidabhasa claims mind as Aham, Ahamvritti as Aham, Ahankara as Aham, and the gross body, physical body is Aham. And therefore, it has a sense of limitation. And to get rid of sense of limitation, he has a lot of desire. To fulfill the desire and gain that sense of fulfillment, where he does a lot of karma phala, punya papa, janmas, etc. everything. That's how samsara is born. This is how samsara, which is a product of ignorance, avidya, atmajnana. So this is how, this is a description. But anyway, so the basically what we want to convey is this, that this Chidabhasa is an independent entity of the mind. Even though experientially you will not find Chidabhasa as, you cannot separate experientially and say this is Chidabhasa, this is mind. You cannot prove like that. But Shastra talks about, through Pravesha Shruti, that basically Atma enters them into the mind. then definitely it is in the form of Chidabhasa, and therefore Chidabhasa is a independent or separate entity from the mind. That is we can say on the basis of Shastra Pramana. So this is how it is. Then in verse 38 further it says, we'll see that. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.